"You're just the help, sweetheart." The words landed in the grand ballroom of the officers' club the way a dropped tray lands, sudden and small and loud, and Bianca Prescott did not so much as glance to see where they fell. She had said them the way she said most things, over her shoulder, already moving, certain the world would rearrange itself in her wake. The chandeliers threw their gold down over 400 folded napkins and a head table dressed in white, and the woman with the garment bag over one shoulder simply stood in that gold and let the sentence pass through her like weather through a door. Bianca was 49, and she wore the room like a second gown. Her husband commanded the post. That made the ballroom hers by a logic she had never once questioned, the receiving line hers, the color guard staged along the head table hers, the caterers and the stewards, and the young soldiers on the serving detail all hers to move like place cards. She had decided, in the half-second it took to see the plain, dark dress and the bag and the stillness, that this woman was staff who had wandered somewhere she did not belong. Certainty was Bianca's native country. She had lived there so long she no longer noticed its borders. "There's a table by the dais that's crooked," Bianca said, turning now, gesturing with 2 fingers, the way one dismisses smoke. "Fix it, and find whoever let you in through the front and tell them the help uses the service door." The woman set the garment bag over the back of a chair. She did not startle. She did not apologize, which was the first thing frightened staff did, and she did not hurry, which was the second. She stood flat on both feet with her hands quiet at her sides, and she looked at the room before she looked at Bianca. The exits first, then the place cards, then the 2 flags staged at the head table. Only then did her eyes come to rest on the woman in front of her, and even that she did without heat. There was a completeness to the way she took in a space, the way a person reads terrain rather than decor, and if Bianca had been the sort of woman who noticed such things, she might have felt the first cold thread of the night right then. She was not that sort of woman. "And don't talk to anyone," Bianca added, because the silence annoyed her. "Just do your job." It was 1840 hours. The band was tuning in the corner, a slow, bright braid of brass warming up under the chandeliers, a trombone finding its low note and holding it. Guests were an hour out. The great room smelled of floor wax and cut flowers and the faint metal tang of the silver being set. The woman walked to the head table, and instead of the crooked table nobody had actually needed fixed, she stopped at the 2 flags. The national colors and the unit colors had been set in the wrong order. The committee had reversed them, the way people do who have never once had to know. She moved them. National to its own right, unit to the left, the eagle where the eagle belonged. It took her perhaps 4 seconds, and it corrected a mistake that would have been photographed 200 times before the night was out, a mistake that would have gone out on the Post's official page under the outgoing commander's name and lived there forever. Nobody saw it. Nobody but the man by the color guard. Command Sergeant Major Emmett Boyd was 51, and he had spent 30 of those years learning to read the backs of people. He was working the event in his dress uniform, quiet along the wall where senior enlisted go to keep a room from falling apart. And when the woman in the plain dress touched the flags, he went still, the way a compass goes still. He knew that stillness. He had seen it once before, at altitude, in weather, with everything on fire, and he had never once forgotten it. He stared at her, like a man hearing a song he cannot place and cannot stop hearing. And he said nothing, because some songs you do not interrupt. His mouth had gone dry. His hand, without his telling it to, had drifted an inch toward the seam of his trousers, the old reflex of a man readying to come to attention. The doors were still shut. The gold still fell. And the woman Bianca Prescott had called the help stood among the flags she had just set right, unbothered, waiting for a night that had not yet learned what it was. She did not look at Boyd. She did not need to. She had already counted him among the few things in the room that were exactly what they appeared to be. By 1900, the ball had a problem, and the problem had teeth. It began where these things always begin, in the small machinery nobody thinks about until it seizes. The audiovisual cue sheet did not match the protocol timeline. The receiving line order had the outgoing commander shaking hands before the honors, which put the whole sequence backward. The head table seating had 2 colonels in 1 chair and a chaplain in none. The national anthem was cued after the invocation instead of before it. The committee stood in a knot near the dais and passed the panic between them like a hot dish, and Bianca, who had appointed the committee, blamed the stewards, and then the caterers, and then, sweeping past, the woman in the dark dress. "This is what happens," Bianca announced to no one and everyone, "when you let the help think." The woman in the dark dress fixed it in 90 seconds. She did it without being asked, which was its own quiet insolence, and she did it the way a mechanic clears a jam, by touch and certainty. Honors first, then the receiving line, then seating. She reordered the cue cards with 2 fingers, sliding one from the bottom to the top, turning another over, and the sequence that had been a knot became a line. She spoke exactly once, to the protocol officer, and what she said was a time and a shape, not a suggestion. Guests seated by 1940, honors at 1945. The protocol officer, a harried captain named Doss, who had been drowning for 10 minutes, looked at the cards, looked at her, and stopped drowning. He did not ask who she was. People in the middle of drowning do not interrogate the hand that pulls them out. That was when Boyd came off the wall. He crossed to her slow, the way you cross to a live wire, and he pitched his voice under the brass so only she would hear it. "Ma'am," he said. "Do I know you?" She turned her head. She looked at him the way she had looked at the room, taking the whole of him in a single unhurried sweep. The dress uniform, the rocker on his chevrons, the ribbons that told their own 30-year story, the eyes of a man who had been somewhere and come back changed. And she gave him nothing but the smallest shake of her head. Not a denial, an order. Not now. Boyd had spent his life learning which silences were orders. He read this one in half a breath, and he stepped back, and something in his spine straightened a full degree without his permission. "Yes, ma'am," he said, to a woman he had just been told, in the language of a look, not to acknowledge. He returned to his post by the color guard, and he stood a little more like a soldier than he had 5 minutes before, and he waited, because that too was an order, and he had recognized the hand it came from even before he had put a name to it. The band found its key. The room ran on a fix it did not know it had received, timed to the minute by a woman it had decided to throw out. The doors were minutes from opening, and in the corner, under the tuning brass, Command Sergeant Major Emmett Boyd stood in the gold light like a man expecting a general, and told no one why. He was doing arithmetic behind his still face, a deployment, a call sign that was not a call sign, but simply a rank and a name spoken with awe, a night everyone who had been there still talked about in low voices. The arithmetic kept coming out the same. He kept hoping he was wrong, and knowing he was not. Bianca Prescott had never in her life wasted a grievance, and she did not intend to waste this one. By 1915, she had turned the far end of the ballroom into a small court. 2 other spouses orbited her, drawn the way people are always drawn to someone certain of her own gravity, and Bianca held them with the story of the rude caterer who thought she ran the place. She told it well. She told it with her hands. She made the woman in the dark dress into a character in a comedy that only Bianca found funny, and the two spouses laughed because laughing was the price of the orbit, and because it was easier than the alternative, which was to notice. "She moved my flags," Bianca said, delighted with her own outrage. The help moved my flags, as if she'd know, as if any of them know anything but where the trash goes. One of the spouses, a younger woman named Pell, who had learned the choreography of the court only recently, laughed a little too long, and Bianca rewarded her with a smile. The young soldier came through the court at the wrong moment. Specialist Nadia Reyes was 20 years old, and she was carrying a tray of stemmed glasses across a floor that had been waxed to a mirror. And when Bianca's laugh cracked out sharp behind her, she flinched, and the flinch went down her arm, and the tray tipped. 3 glasses. The sound of them on the marble was very bright and very final. 3 separate notes, and then a silence that spread. Reyes went white to the lips. She had been on the detail for 6 hours. She had another 6 to go. She had a daughter at home with a sitter she was paying by the hour, and a car with a warning light she was praying about. And none of that was visible on her face, but all of it was in the way her hands opened at her sides. Bianca turned on her like weather. "You," she said, and the delight was gone, and something colder had come up under it. "Do you have any idea what these cost? Do you have any idea what tonight costs?" She stepped closer, and her voice did the thing practiced cruelty does, went quiet so that people leaned in to hear it. "Take her name. She's done for the night. She's done, and I want her off this detail, and I want whoever hired her to know why. I want it in writing." Reyes stood in the wreckage of the glasses with her hands open at her sides, and every soldier in that room knew the exact arithmetic running behind her eyes, the pay she could not lose, the counseling statement, the letter, the whole slow avalanche a woman like Bianca could start with 1 sentence and never think about again. The woman in the dark dress stepped between them. She did not raise her voice. She never once raised her voice. She simply put herself in the line of the weather, flat-footed and quiet. And she said, "That was me. I bumped her." It was not true, and everyone who mattered would later know it was not true. And she said it the way she had said everything, without heat, an immovable thing set gently down in the path of a moving one. "My fault. I'll cover the glasses." Then, to Reyes, low, under the noise, so the girl and no one else could hear. "Reset. Breathe. You're fine." Reyes looked at her, the way a person in deep water looks at a hand. Bianca, contradicted by staff, went a shade of red the Chandeliers were not responsible for. She was not accustomed to interruption, and certainly not from a caterer. "You," she breathed, "you do not speak. You do not step in. You are going to regret walking in here tonight. When my husband hears—" And she let the name of her husband's authority hang in the air the way she always did, a blade she had never had to actually use because the mere gleam of it had always been enough. And she meant every word, and she did not know, could not know, that she was making a promise to the wrong person. 30 minutes before the room learned who that person was. Hold on to that feeling. The tightness in your chest, watching a girl nearly ruined over 3 glasses by someone who will never feel the weight of it. Hold it. If stories like this one are why you're here, subscribe to Honor Tales, because the account is about to come due, and you are going to want to be in the room when it does. Reyes steadied. The glasses were swept away by a steward who would not meet anyone's eyes. And Bianca Prescott's smile sharpened into something with an edge because she had decided this was a war, and she had never lost one to the help. If she could not have the woman thrown out socially, Bianca would have her thrown out on paper. This was the instinct of a woman who had spent 25 years married to authority and mistaking proximity for possession. She knew how the machinery worked because she had watched it work for her husband, year after year, base after base, and she knew that a room could be made to remove a person if the paper said so. So she went to the club manager, a soft-spoken man named Corbin, who had spent his career learning which complaints could end his, and she used the only tool she had ever needed. "My husband commands this post," she said, low and pleasant and absolutely certain. "That woman is not on any vendor list. She is rude, she is disruptive, and she assaulted a member of the serving staff. I watched her shove a girl and break a tray." The lie came out smooth as the marble. "I want her gone, before the guests are fully seated. And I want it documented, so that when my husband asks, and he will ask, there is a record of how well you handled it, or how poorly." The club manager was not a brave man, and Bianca had chosen her lever precisely. He found the protocol officer, the same Captain Doss the woman had rescued at 1900, and he set the machinery turning. A security escort was summoned from the front desk. A note was drafted on the club's incident form. An unaffiliated civilian, disruptive conduct, alleged contact with staff, request for removal. On paper, in the space of 6 minutes, the woman in the dark dress became a problem to be solved. Captain Doss, drafting it, felt something was wrong and could not say what, and did what cowed captains do, which was to write it down anyway and let the paper carry the weight his spine would not. She watched it happen. That was the thing Boyd could not stop watching, from his post by the flags. She stood at the edge of the room, and she watched the machinery turn against her, and she did not resist it. Her eyes moved over it the way they had moved over the exits, taking its measure. The manager's hurried conference, the escort taking up position by the doors, the incident form on its clipboard, and her face did not change. She let the note be drafted. She let the escort be called. She was a woman standing flat-footed in the path of a slow avalanche, and she had decided, for reasons no one in the room could yet see, to let it come, because there is a kind of person who understands that the surest way to measure a command is to watch what it does to someone it believes has no power at all. Once, quietly, she took out her phone. She typed one line and sent it to a number no one in the ballroom would have recognized. She did not smile when she typed it. She simply set a thing in motion the way she had set the flags in motion, by touch and certainty. And then she put the phone away and folded her hands, and became again a still point in a moving room. The line was one word and a time. It said, 1945. The escort was told to have her out before the honors. Nobody checked what time the honors were. Nobody thought to. The room was assembling, on paper, and in fact, exactly the wrong story about the woman at its center, and she let every page of it be written, because she knew something the room did not, which was how the last page read. Command Sergeant Major Emmett Boyd could not let it go. He was a disciplined man, and he had been given an order in the language of a look, and he intended to keep it. But there is a difference between keeping silent about who a person is and standing by while good soldiers walk off a cliff. He had watched a lot of soldiers walk off cliffs in 30 years. He had learned that the ones who fall hardest are always the ones most certain of the ground. So he did the thing a senior enlisted man is for. He went to the edge of Bianca's court, and he tried, carefully, to save them from themselves. "Ma'am," he said, to the circle, keeping his commander's secret while spending everything else he had. "I'd let this one go. I served under an officer once who stood just like that. Same stillness, same way of reading a room before she read a face." He let that sit, and when it did not land, he tried the plainest words he had. "If she's who I think she is, walk away. Please, for your own sake. Walk away." They laughed at him. "The caterer's got a bodyguard now," Bianca said, and the two spouses laughed on cue, and the younger one, Pell, said something about how the sergeant major must be sweet on the help, and the court enjoyed itself. Boyd stood there in his dress uniform with 30 years on his chest and let the laughter break over him, because he had learned long ago that you cannot make a person hear a thing they have decided not to know. He had said his piece. The record, his own private record, the one a man keeps in himself, would show that he had warned them. It was all the mercy he was permitted to give. He thought, standing there while they laughed, about the last time he had failed to make someone listen. It had cost a good young sergeant a stripe and a bad 6 months, and Boyd had carried it since, the way senior enlisted carry all the ones they could not reach. He had promised himself after that he would always say the words even when he knew they would not land, because the saying was the part that was his, and the hearing was the part that belonged to them. So he had said the words. He had spent what he could spend, and now the only thing left in his hands was the timing, to be standing when the minute came, so that the room would have at least one man already on his feet to show it how. He looked at the woman across the room. She had heard it. He could tell she had heard it, because her eyes had come to him once, and in them was something that was almost, not quite, an apology for putting him in this, for the order she had given that tied his hands. He gave her the smallest nod back. Understood, ma'am. He would keep the secret. He would also keep his post, and when the minute came, he intended to be the first man on his feet. Do you feel it building? The certainty that the whole room is standing on a trap door, and only 2 people can see the hinge? Stay in the room. Subscribe to Honor Tales, because the hinge is about to give, and what falls through is not who anyone expects. Boyd went back to the color guard. He squared the flags she had set, checked them once more against 30 years of habit, and found them, of course, perfect. And he stood beside them like the only man in the ballroom who knew a general was about to walk in, which, in fact, he was. She did not open the garment bag until she was alone. There was an anteroom off the ballroom, a quiet paneled box of a space where the club kept its silver and its silence, and she stepped into it at 19:30 and closed the door on the brass and the gold. Only here did she let herself slow. Only here, where no one watched, did the stillness become something other than armor. She set the bag on the felt-topped table among the coffee urns and the stacked chargers, and she stood over it a moment with her eyes closed, the way a person stands at a threshold they have crossed many times, and never lightly. She unzipped the bag. The dress blue coat came out first, dark and heavy and exact, the Army service uniform she had worn to more of these nights than she could count. On the shoulder boards, 2 stars. On the left breast, a rack of ribbons that told a story in colors most of the ballroom could not read. A story of years, of theaters, of a career built one hard posting at a time, of things done and things survived. And near the top of that rack, the ribbon for the Distinguished Flying Cross, red and white and blue, in a pattern that meant nothing to a civilian, and everything to anyone who had ever been pulled out of somewhere they should have died. She looked at it the way you look at an old scar, not with pride, with memory. 21 years fell away. In 2005, she had been 32 years old and a major, and she had flown into weather that grounded everyone with sense, because a crew was down on a ridge, and the weather was the only reason the enemy thought no one would come. She remembered the operations tent, the way the maps had gone gray under everyone's certainty that it could not be done, the way the young voices on the radio had gotten flatter and flatter as the men on the ridge understood the same thing. She had listened to that flattening, and she had picked up her helmet. She remembered the argument, too, the colonel who had told her the mission was suicide, and the weather made it worse, and the way she had answered him. Not with defiance. She had never had much use for defiance, but with a single flat sentence that had ended the conversation. Then it's a good thing they sent someone who doesn't need the weather. She had not felt brave saying it. She had felt only the arithmetic of it, the 4 men on the ridge against the 1 machine, and the 2 crew who would fly it, and the way the numbers came out the same, no matter how many times she ran them, which was that you go. You always go. The going was not courage. The going was just the refusal to let the numbers win. She had brought the aircraft in once, and taken fire, and pulled off, and brought it in again, because once was not enough to load everyone, and the second time the ridge was burning, and the radio was full of voices trying not to sound afraid. Bringing her back around, she had said, flat on the net. Load fast. She had learned her stillness there, at altitude, with everything on fire, the specific and terrible calm of a person who understands that panic is a luxury the people depending on her cannot afford. Her hands had been perfectly steady on the controls, while a part of her she kept in a locked room screamed the whole way down. She had carried out a wounded lieutenant named Jonah Merrick with her own arms across 40 meters of open ground while the rotor wash tore at both of them, and he had lived, and he had spent every year since owing her a debt he phrased as a joke because the truth of it was too large to say plainly. And she had not carried out Staff Sergeant Isaac Hale, her crew chief, 29 years old, with a wife and an unborn son, and a laugh you could hear over the turbines, who had stood in the door and held it and passed the wounded through, one after another, and been the reason 4 men made it, and not himself. She had turned the aircraft to go back for him. There had been nothing left on the ridge to go back for. She had flown home in a machine that would not stop shaking, and she had not understood for a long time that the shaking was her. They had given her the Distinguished Flying Cross for that night. She had stood at attention while they read the citation, the theater, the year, the act, the decoration, and she had accepted the medal the way you accept a stone you will carry the rest of your life, because refusing it would have made Hale's holding of the door mean less, and she would not let it mean less. Every rank she had earned since, every command, every star, she had earned partly for him, so that the door he held would keep on meaning something in rooms he would never enter. She closed the coat over the 2 stars. Not yet. She heard, through the wall, the sound of the ballroom doors opening, the first swell of arriving guests, the band lifting into something with a spine. She zipped the bag halfway and left the stars inside it a moment longer, and she stood in the silver light of the anteroom with her hand flat on the coat, and she was, for exactly 1 breath, the major on the ridge again, and then she was the general the room was about to meet. She had already learned the only lesson the ballroom could teach her, 21 years and 1 burning ridge ago. Nothing Bianca Prescott could do to her tonight was a thing that had not already been outweighed, and outweighed by more than Bianca Prescott would ever be able to imagine. At 1944, the escort came for her, and Bianca came to do it herself. That was the mistake, not the escort, which was only cowardice following paper, but the choice to make a performance of it. Bianca saw the 2 security men crossing the floor, and she intercepted them, because a removal done by staff was merely tidy, and a removal done by her own hand, in front of the arriving guests, was a victory, and Bianca Prescott did not collect tidiness. She collected victories. She wanted the room to see who ran it. She wanted the help humiliated in the gold light with witnesses, so that the lesson would travel, so that no caterer would ever again move her flags. She crossed the floor with the 2 spouses in her wake, and the guests filling the tables, and the band bright above it all, and she reached the woman in the dark dress, and she took her by the arm. She took her hard. fingers closing on the muscle above the elbow, a grip meant to move and to shame, nails biting through the thin, dark fabric. And she pulled. "Out," Bianca said, loud enough now for the nearest tables to turn. "Now. You should never have come in here. You do not belong in this room. You have never belonged in a room like this. And you are going to walk out those doors in front of everyone so that you understand exactly what you are." It was witnessed. 40 people saw a woman in a gown lay hands on a woman in a plain dark dress and haul at her toward the doors, and the ones who would matter later marked the time without knowing why. 1944. The woman did not pull away. She let the grip stand. She looked down once at the hand on her arm. The manicured fingers, the wedding set worth more than Reyes made in a year. And then up at Bianca's face. And her eyes went, briefly, to the far doors, where something had begun to move. And then she did the one thing Bianca was not prepared for in all her certainty. She smiled. It was the first time all night. It was not a frightened smile, and it was not a cruel one. It was the smile of a person who has been waiting, patiently, for a clock to reach a particular minute, and has just heard it strike. "You're right on time," the woman said softly, and it was not clear she was talking about Bianca at all. Bianca faltered. The grip loosened by a degree she did not decide to loosen. Something in that smile did not fit any story she had been telling all evening, and for the first time in the whole gold night, a thread of cold went through her that she could not name, a small animal, warning from a part of her older than her certainty. She almost let go. She almost, in that half-second, understood. But certainty is a hard country to leave, and she had lived there too long, and she tightened her grip instead, and opened her mouth to say something final. At the far doors, a young captain in dress blues stepped onto the ballroom floor and stopped, and did not move another inch, her eyes locked across the whole length of the room on the woman being dragged toward the exit. At 1945, the room found out. Captain Lena Osgood was 31 years old, and she crossed the ballroom floor in dress blues at a pace that was not a walk and was not a run, a controlled, purposeful stride that made the guests part without knowing why they parted, and she did not look at the band or the gowns or the woman with her hand still on the arm of the woman in the dark dress. She looked only at that second woman. 3 paces out she stopped, and she came to attention so hard the sound of her heels was its own announcement, a crack of leather on marble that cut clean under the brass, and she rendered honors, and her voice carried the length of the room. "General Aldrich, ma'am." A beat, ringing. "The room is ready for you." The word went through the ballroom like current through water. "General." The protocol officer had been waiting for exactly this. One hand on the microphone since 1944, and now he lifted it, and his voice filled the room over the strings. "Ladies and gentlemen," the band cut, the trombone dying mid-phrase. 400 faces turned. "Attention on deck." The old words, the ones that move a military room the way nothing else on earth moves it. The incoming commanding general, a pause the size of a held breath. Major General Vivian Aldrich. Along the wall, Command Sergeant Major Emmett Boyd was already standing, had been standing for an hour, and now he came to attention beside the flags he had squared. 30 years snapping into a single line, and the color guards snapped with him, and the sound of it ran outward across the ballroom as table after table rose, chairs scraping back, dress uniforms straightening, gowns rustling, 400 people coming to their feet for the woman in the plain dark dress. It moved across the room like wind across a field of wheat, that rising from the front to the back until no one in the ballroom was seated except those too stunned to remember how to stand. Bianca Prescott's hand was still on her arm. Her face did the thing the whole night had been building toward, and it did it slowly, in stages, for everyone to see. Confusion first, a small frown, a search for the joke, a glance at her spouses as if one of them might explain it. Then disbelief, the head giving a tiny shake. No, this is the caterer. I told her to use the service door. I told her not to talk to anyone. I told her. Then recognition, arriving all at once, and from a great height. The understanding of exactly whose arm she was gripping, exactly what she had said, exactly who had heard it, exactly how many. And then, last, horror. Pure and cold and total, as the arithmetic she had run so casually on Nadia Reyes ran now on herself. The counseling statement and the letter and the whole slow avalanche, except that this time the avalanche was already moving, and it had her name on it, and her husband's name under that. Her fingers came off the arm, as if it had turned to stove iron. Across the room, her husband, Major General Ambrose Prescott, the outgoing commander, went the gray of old ash. He had walked in a minute before, straightening his own coat, ready for the last ball of a long and honorable command. He had seen his wife's hand on the arm of his own relief, in front of his entire command, in front of the general officers and the colonels and the spouses and the young soldiers on the serving detail, on the last week of 30 years. And there was nothing on earth he could do about any of it now, and his face knew it before the rest of him did. The two security men, the escort Bianca had summoned to remove the help, reached the head of the room. The protocol officer met them and said something low, 3 or 4 words, and they turned. They did not turn toward Vivian Aldrich. They stepped, one to each side, to the woman in the gown, the woman who had laid hands on the incoming commanding general in front of 40 witnesses, and one of them said, very quietly, without any pleasure in it at all, the way professionals do the hardest parts of their job, "Ma'am, come with us, please." Bianca Prescott was removed from the ball she had believed she owned, escorted out through the same doors she had wanted to throw a stranger through, exactly as she had planned it for someone else, and the room did not laugh and did not gasp. The room stood in silence, at attention, for the woman she had called the help, and let her go out into the dark without a single word spent on her, which was, in the end, the loudest thing the room could have done. Silence from 400 people is a weight. Bianca walked out under all of it. The doors closed behind her. The chandeliers held their gold. And Major General Vivian Aldrich picked up her garment bag from the back of the chair and walked, unhurried, flat-footed, quiet, toward the front of a room that was finally standing the way it should have stood the moment she walked in. She did not make a spectacle of it. That was the last thing anyone expected, and it was the truest thing about her. She could have. The room was hers now. The microphone was hers. The whole gold weight of 400 people's shame was hers to spend however she liked. A lesser story would have had her spend it, would have had her take the microphone and name what had happened, and let Bianca Prescott's name burn in front of the command. But Vivian Aldrich had learned a long time ago the difference between winning and needing to be seen to win, and she had buried the second one on a ridge in 2005, along with a man who had never needed anyone to see anything, and she did not dig it up for Bianca Prescott. Cruelty answered with cruelty was just cruelty with better standing. She had watched too many good commands rot from exactly that. So she let the reckoning move at its own speed, and it moved, because reckonings do not need help when the truth is heavy enough. The protocol officer's incident form now read very differently in the light of who the unaffiliated civilian had turned out to be, and it would be read by people who mattered, and it would not be Reyes, whose name was on the wrong side of it. The club manager, Corbin, found her at the edge of the room and began an apology that shook, the whole soft, careful edifice of his career trembling in his voice, and she let him finish it. That was its own mercy, letting a frightened man reach the end of his sentence, and said only, "You'll do better next time," which was both an absolution and a sentence, and he understood that he had been given his career back on the condition that he remember how close he had come to spending it on the wrong person. And Ambrose Prescott, in the last week of a command that had been, until tonight, honorable, came to her stiff and gray and started to speak, to explain, to apologize, to salvage something, and she stopped him with 3 words that cost her nothing and him everything. "Not here, Ambrose. Not in front of the command. Not tonight." His wife's removal would shadow his final change of command on its own weight, would be the thing people remembered about a career that had deserved better, and she did not have to add a single word to it. She did not. There are punishments that require no hand. Word of it would travel faster than any order she could give. By morning, the whole post would know. The sergeants over coffee, the lieutenants in the motor pool, the spouses on their group chats, that the new commanding general had been called the help and had let the room do the rest, had not raised her voice, had not needed to. It was the best introduction a commander could ask for, and she had not planned it, or she had planned only the smallest part of it, the one word and the time, and let character do the remainder. A command learns its commander in the first story it tells about her. This would be the first story. She could not have written a better one, and she took no pleasure in that either, because the price of it had been a girl's terror over 3 broken glasses, and she would have spared Reyes the whole night if she could have. If you have ever watched someone win the right way, win by refusing to become the thing that came for them, then you already know why this channel exists. If it moved you, subscribe to Honor Tales, and tell someone in the comments about a time you saw quiet dignity beat loud cruelty, because those stories deserve to travel. Then she went to find the girl. Specialist Nadia Reyes was in the corridor behind the kitchens, where soldiers go to shake, standing with her back against the cool tile and her hands pressed flat to it, and she came to a ragged attention when she saw the 2 stars now on the coat, and her eyes were enormous, and her whole small frame was braced for the avalanche she was sure was coming for her too. Vivian Aldrich stood in front of her and did the thing that would matter to this girl for the next 30 years, the thing Isaac Hale had done in a doorway, and she had been doing in doorways ever since. "That wasn't your fault, and it's off your record as of right now," she said. "There is no record. There was never going to be a record, not while I'm the one signing them." She let that land, watched the first crack of relief go through the girl's face. "You kept your feet under fire tonight, Specialist. You took the worst a room can hand a person, and you did not drop your standard. Most people twice your rank didn't do as well tonight, and I was watching all of them." And then, because the girl was still trembling, and a soldier needs somewhere to put herself when she trembles, needs an order, more than she needs comfort, Vivian Aldrich gave her one she could hold on to. "Head up, you did fine. That's an order." Reyes's chin came up. Somewhere under the fear, a soldier stood up inside her and stayed standing, and would keep standing, in rooms this general would never see, for the rest of a career that had almost ended over 3 glasses and a woman's certainty. She would remember, every time a room tried to make her small, that a general had once stepped into the weather for her and called it nothing. Later, when the ball had folded itself back into brass and empty chairs, and stewards stacking the chargers, Vivian Aldrich stood alone on the terrace of the officers' club. She was in dress blues now, the 2 stars catching the last of the light, and the post spread out below her in the dusk. Quiet. Ordered. Hers as of tomorrow. The barracks and the motor pools and the flight line and the thousands of lives that would run for the next 2 years on her judgment. She did not feel triumph. She felt the particular tiredness of a woman who has, one more time, outlasted the wrong people by simply refusing to become them. And under the tiredness, always, the old weight she carried and didn't set down. Her phone lit in her hand. It was a message from overseas, from a theater half the world away, from a captain named Jonah Merrick, who had been a wounded lieutenant on a burning ridge 21 years ago, and who had spent every year since keeping the same joke alive across every base and every deployment and every promotion, because it was how he said the thing he could not say plainly. She read it in the dark, and for the first time all night, alone where no one could see, the stillness eased, and something behind it that was almost grief and almost love came up into her face. "Still owe you a door, ma'am," the message read. "Heard you took a whole room tonight without firing a shot." From the mountains. Same greeting we always used, the one Hale started. "Come see us when the stars let you." We kept a seat. She read it twice. She looked out over the post that was now hers, the lights coming on across it one by one like a slow constellation, each one a barracks room, a family, a soldier. And she thought of Isaac Hale in the doorway, holding it so the others could pass, laughing over the turbines. And she thought that there are more ways than one to hold a door, and that she had held this one tonight for a girl named Reyes, and that this, too, counted. That it all counted. That the door he had held 21 years ago was still open, and that everyone she pulled through it after him walked through it partly on his account. She pocketed the phone. She squared her shoulders under the 2 stars, and she turned back toward the light, unhurried, flat-footed, quiet, a general at last in a room that finally knew it, and would not forget it, and had learned in a single gold evening the oldest lesson the uniform teaches, which is that you never, ever know who is standing quietly in the plain clothes at the edge of your certainty. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.